And we're back. Yes, 1920s, Chapter 20, Part 2. Part 1, we talked about the KKK, the anti-immigrant, the Sacco and Vanzetti case, and ultimately the young group, the young population of individuals that are expressing themselves and enjoying the 1920s in life to the fullest. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about maybe the backlash of that, so to speak, and also we're going to talk about prohibition and the African American culture and how in the 1920s they're going to kind of have that the Harlem Renaissance, so to speak. And we're going to talk about that, and they're going to talk about the popular pop culture as well. So let's not waste any more time, and let's jump in. So remember, this new morality is the flappers, is the teenagers in their cars driving around, is that expression of self, so to speak. And the reaction to this is this fundamentalist movement. And basically, the fundamentalist movement means that the Bible is literally true and without error. So here they would be rejecting Darwin's evolution theory. And they would believe in creationism, which means God created the world as the Bible describes. So the creation story, Adam and Eve, and that is how creationists and people who believe in creationism believes that the world is started. People who believe in the natural evolution believes that we come from the lineage of ape. Ape becomes man, or ape becomes Neanderthal comes, blah, blah, blah. I take that back, I'm sorry. There's branches that go off, and Neanderthal was not a branch that we came off of. So let me digress and say we evolutionized by an ape, but not through the Neanderthal branch. Okay, whatever. This isn't science class. Let's keep on going. So in Tennessee, there was a law that banned teaching evolution. And John T. Scopes taught evolution and was arrested for violating the law. So he goes on trial. Lawyers are William Jennings Bryan, who is the prosecutor. Now, that name should sound familiar. He was a 3-time presidential candidate. Never has won, but he was a 3-time presidential candidate. His name has been in our notes, and we've talked about him the last semester. He was representing the creationists. Okay, Clarence Darrow, right down here is Bryan. Clarence Darrow was the defender, and he was defending John Scopes. Ultimately, John Scopes is found guilty. I believe it was a $100 fine, and I don't even think there was a couple days in jail. I'm not sure, but very little. But eventually, this conviction is overturned because of some error in the trial. So, but it's called the Scopes monkey trial, and basically they say monkey trials because evolution, we believe we evolved from apes. Moving on, 18th Amendment bans the sale of alcohol. Yes, remember, since the Seneca Falls Convention, the idea of prohibition, or temperance, I should say temperance, has been big. That group believes that alcohol is the basis of a lot of crime, a lot of domestic problems within the family. So eventually now we're got enough where the government has enough votes, has enough, let's say, support by the public, and we get the 18th Amendment, and it's supposed to help reduce that domestic violence, unemployment, poverty. The Volstead Act is enacted to enforce the prohibition, the 18th Amendment, and it bans the sale and manufacture, export, transport, and possession of alcohol in the U.S. This applies to any beverage that has over 0.5% of alcohol or more, and federal agents could investigate and prosecute violators. What does that bring about? Well, that brings about speakeasies, secret bars that you could only find by somebody telling you. And then the only way that you could get in was with a secret password. There are speakeasies all over the place. New Orleans, New York, Chicago. They were all over. And then you got bootleggers, okay? Bootleggers, illegal production and distribution of... So there are going to be those guys in rural America that are making their own whiskey, okay? It's called moonshine. And a lot of times, moonshine, they'll be... would be, you know, we talked about this a little bit earlier, the Dukes of Hazzard, running liquor between counties and all that stuff. And Jayton, thank you so much. You brought this up earlier, that that bootleggers, that the running, those driving, the cars being chased by cops, that was the start of what we call NASCAR today. That came up with the idea, kind of pushed it forward, and introduced the idea of NASCAR. So that's the first time I heard that. So Jayton, thank you so much again for bringing that up. So yes, this prohibition probably does something more to expend more criminals, more criminal activity, compared to making it better. And that's because it's going to help make organized crime. But before we do this, I want you to look at this picture here. This first picture, there's something different about the two. I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds, and then I want you to just kind of try to figure out what is different between the two. All right, now this is a part where I so wish that we were together and you could tell me things about what you see and we'd have this great conversation, but I'm just going to have to jump in and tell you what the right thing and the wrong thing was. If you looked at right by his elbow on the table, did you see these goblets? Yes, these are alcohol, wine, distillery, whatever it is, distilled spirits. And if you jump over here, it's gone. Oh, no. Yes, this was in the 1920s. This was the act of prohibitionists changing this. Now, we didn't know this, but George Washington in his day was one of the country's biggest distillers. Okay, he enjoyed drinking alcohol, but we never really learned about this because the prohibitionists in the 1920s did a very good job of erasing that of George Washington's past. So, just a little example of a little bit of that. Also, here we talked about the rise of organized crime. Gangsters supplied and ran speakeasies, making huge profits. $60 million a year brought in this idea of organized crime and bootlegging. $60 million brought in. This guy named Al Capone in Chicago, he is going to be a big speakeasy runner. I mean, he was organized crime too, that he was dangerous. 70 federal agents were killed during this Prohibition era. Not all by Al Capone, but Al Capone was a part of that. Eventually, he is brought down by the idea of tax evasion. However, in the 1930s, Al Capone will be the first person to open up a soup kitchen in Chicago to feed the unemployed. So during the Depression, he steps up and opens up a soup kitchen. Ultimately, the 21st Amendment, the Prohibition is repealed in 1933. African American culture. This is the time when the Harlem Renaissance is just exploding, and they say the flowering or the growth of the African American arts. in New York City's Harlem neighborhood. Remember, then during World War II, there was that great migration of African Americans from the South coming to the northern cities. Yes, so there's a big population. There's huge African American neighborhoods in these cities. During this Renaissance, they're going to create racial pride. They're going to develop a sense of community, artistic development, political organization. During this political organization, they are going to talk about how racism. They're going to talk about the hatred for racism, the defiance, and why, and the injustice that it is bringing. Some jazz music, some ideas. Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, some blues music by Bessie Smith, theater, the Apollo, Cotton Club. This lady right here is Josephine Baker. She was primarily in Paris, but she was looked upon as a very famous person. She dressed like the Flappers, so very revealing clothing. She did exotic dancing, and she was believed to be a very in European the European views of being a very exotic person. She was given a plethora of gifts, diamonds, cars, received approximately 1,500 marriage proposals. She enjoyed this celebrity status for 50 years until her death in 1975. That was mainly in Paris, though. However, the racism of America kind of prevented her talents from being wholly accepted in the United States. Here, let's listen a little bit to Louis Armstrong and his music.
Oh, play that thing, Mr. Sincere Lord. You know you can do it. Everybody from New Orleans can really do that thing. Hi.
I know you guys would be shaking your heads and snickering at me because I'm in here just kind of moving with the music. I love music. I was a big band and choir person in high school and a little bit in college, so I really appreciate this kind of stuff. And I know there's a lot of you out there that are in band and choir or both, and I know that this is something that you enjoy too. So we're going to move on. We're almost done here, guys. Oops. There we go. Politics. National advancements for the National Association for Advancement of Colored People is the NAACP, and this fought for anti-lynching laws. This guy named Marcus Garvey, who is his picture right there, he came up with this idea of a black nationalism, and it was the idea to glorify the traditions in the black culture. He stressed that education and living separately from whites encouraged immigration to Liberia. When have we talked about African Americans going to Liberia? Yeah, long time ago, during slavery, before the Civil War, and he kind of resurrects this idea that they should go and they should start their own. African Americans should start their own country. He passed laws against lynching, and he also came up with the idea and advocated for pensions for former slaves. He was a Jamaican immigrant, and he eventually is convicted for a mail fraud, and since he was an immigrant, he was deported to Jamaica. He tried to revive his ideas for national African American nationalism, but due to him being outside of the country, it was pretty tough. Pop culture, 1920s. Sports becomes huge. Babe Ruth. We've all heard of Babe Ruth. New York Yankees. College football becomes very popular. Professional golf, tennis, and boxing. Daredevils, Barnstormers. That is people who fly little planes, and they do tricks and that stuff. Mass media, Hollywood, jazz music, Amos and Andy on the radio. Radio shows are going to be big. And then the first talking picture, the Jazz Singer. Here is some art of the day. On the top, it was Edward Hopper. Automat, yes, realism means that portrays real life. And on the bottom is Impressionism, Lower Manhattan. And then art and literature, Charles Sheeler, American Landscape, 1930. And then some other literature right here. F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. We know that. That sounds familiar. Ernest Hemingway, A Farewell to Ernest Hemingway. T.S. Eliot's another a lot of ones we hear today. All right, guys, thank you so much. That is the end. Please click on the link and do your 3 questions. That gives me an idea that you did it, and also you get credit for it. Remember, I don't take a grade whether you get some wrong or not. I just take credit for you doing it. We're working well here, guys. Continue up the good work. Remember, if you have any questions, please come and get a hold of me. A lot of you have been doing that through text and email. I love it, and I will continue to answer. All right. Have a good day. We'll talk to you later.